All right, welcome to our second part of today's lecture, uh, Charlemagne's Empire. So we're going to talk about King Charlemagne and the Frankish Kingdom and get into the Vikings by the end of today. So let's see. First, we have a map detailing some of Charlemagne's empire. So it is the light green and the dark green areas. But this is not the best map. I would actually recommend looking at the one in West in the World. It's a little more detailed, a little more clear in what is what. So take a look at that one. But that is the area that we're going to be talking about today. So you may remember the Frankish Kingdom. We've talked about them a few weeks ago. There are two main dynasties in the Frankish Kingdom. There are the Merovingians. They were the first dynasty, and they were followed by the Carolingian dynasty. So Charlemagne is in the Carolingian dynasty, and as we'll see, he is one of the final rulers from this dynasty. So he reigns the Frankish Kingdom from 768 to 814 CE. It's important to note, though, that he sort of takes over different regions throughout his reign. So he has multiple reigning dates, and as we'll see, he becomes the Holy Roman Emperor in 800 CE. So he undertook 53 campaigns during his reign to expand his empire, and he is most notable for his military victories, his church reforms, and his educational institutions that he established. Um, and the most important thing that you should think about when you think of Charlemagne is that he very closely linked politics and religion. So as he takes over different areas, he often uses religion to introduce his political reign. So one of the ways that he did this was to establish priests and monks in conquered areas. So set up bishops and priests and set up a monastery and introduce conquered areas to Christianity, because he recognized that if he could convert them to the same religion, then they would be much easier to control. And another form of control that he used as his empire expanded were the Missi Dominici, which just means envoy of the ruler. And these were sort of royal officials that were sent out to look after different regions and report back to Charlemagne. All right, so an important event in Charlemagne's reign is his coronation in Rome. So you'll remember that the Frankish kingdoms have been closely aligned with the papacy in Rome for a while, and that's part of how they derive their power is from the support of the popes. So during Charlemagne's reign, Pope Leo, I thought it was second, maybe it is third, I don't remember. Pope Leo. Pope Leo was under attack in Rome, and he called on Charlemagne to come restore him to power. So Charlemagne travels to Rome around 800 CE and uses his armies to sort of quell the attacks, quell the rebellions, and restore Pope Leo to power. And sort of in response to this, on Christmas Day of 800 CE, Pope Leo crowns Charlemagne the emperor. So this is interesting because Rome has not had an emperor for some time, or a particularly well-recognized emperor for some time. It's still in contention with the Byzantine Empire, but the papacy has held the most political and religious power in Rome for a while, and Pope Leo decides to grant Charlemagne the title of Holy Roman Emperor. And this just serves to complicate the relationship between future kings and popes, as well as further distance the Byzantine Empire from that of Rome, and so sort of further solidify this divide between East and West. But it served to solidify or reaffirm the alliance between the papacy and the Frankish kings. So again, we see very extensive use of politics and religion to advance one another by Charlemagne. All right, so because of his location in what is now modern-day France, Charlemagne had some relations with Muslims, with the Caliphate, which, as you may remember, were in Spain at this time. And because of the way that he is spreading his empire and becoming the Holy Roman Empire, Emperor, he also has run-ins with the Byzantine Empire. So he does manage to establish some semblance of peace among these empires, but it is tenuous at best. So there was a formal agreement between the Byzantine and Frankish or Roman empires to essentially agree that the Byzantines would rule in the east and the Franks would rule in the west. But nevertheless, tensions were still very high. But this served to sort of establish a strong relationship with Muslims, as they had a common enemy in the Byzantine Empire. So there was a lot of trade between the two, a lot of sort of good, peaceful diplomacy between the Caliphate and the Franks. All right. What Charlemagne is most often noted for, however, is not his military victories, but his educational reforms. So Alcuin, or Alcuin of York, was an English scholar who was the head of the library at York, and he got the attention of the Pope, and the Pope invited him to come to Rome. And so on his way to meet the Pope, Alcuin stopped in the Frankish Empire and met Charlemagne. And so Charlemagne was very impressed by Alcuin and asked him if he would help him to sort of revamp the educational system in the empire. Part of his reason for wanting to do this was a recognition that religion played a key role in the maintenance of his empire and maintaining the loyalty of his subjects, and that religion really relies on strong education. So Alcuin sort of comes in and assesses things for Charlemagne, makes recommendations, and what they end up doing is establishing free schools in every parish. So a parish is led up by a priest, and each priest was required to open up a free school in which all children in the parish were welcome to come. So they brought in sort of this group of accomplished scholars to establish a literary canon. So he also recognized that we can't just let the priests sort of go in and teach whatever they want. We need to have something that's sort of standardized. And so they put together a sort of a list of books and things that would need to be taught at these schools. So the curriculum that they came up with was divided into two levels. The first level was called the Trivium, and it was composed of grammar, rhetoric, and logic as sort of the foundation for education. And if you sort of moved successfully through this and went on to the next level, that's called the Quadrivium, which consisted of arithmetic, music, geometry, and astronomy. So ultimately, Charlemagne's empire will break up. It does not last nearly as long as some of the other empires that we have studied in this class. So after his death, his son Louis the Pious took over, and then after Louis the Pious's death, his three sons sort of became the rulers of the empire. That was Charles the Bald, Lothair the First, and Louis the German. So while these three are sort of trying to jointly rule the empire, they often got caught in family feuds and engaged in civil wars. So we see again that sort of Germanic tendency towards feuding has not been tamped down by interactions with Roman culture. It's still sort of very strong in the Germanic culture. And they end up in the Treaty of Verdun, they end up dividing the empire into 3 distinct portions, and each sort of taking their own portion, and thus ending the empire's unity as a sort of cohesive whole. So that is the end of the Charlemagne Empire, which then leaves the area sort of weakened to invasions. Because even after they divide up the land, there are still many disputes and civil wars. We still see invasions from Muslims that have been sort of a long-standing threat to European rule. But more interestingly, perhaps, are the Scandinavian warriors, or the Vikings, that we begin to see posing threats to Europe. So the Scandinavians were related to the Germanic tribes. They were Germanic tribes, but at this time they still resembled the earlier tribes that we studied earlier this semester, sort of the ones that came before contact with the Roman Empire. And as most Germanic tribes are, they were very concerned with revenge, which gives them their sort of violent reputation. Like the early Germanic tribes, they were farmers in the north, which is a very difficult thing to do in the north, in the colder climate, with sort of harder soil. So that meant that they often had to rely on fishing, which sort of plays to their benefit later on. So they resembled the tribes that had been invading Rome centuries earlier. I don't know why that's repeated here, just ignore that. Yeah, that's bad editing on my part. Anyway, so as they're becoming more of an established civilization in Scandinavia, they are becoming drawn to the wealth of the Western kingdoms. So we've already sort of looked at some of the Anglo-Saxon hordes, and sort of treasure that's being spread around in this area, and the Vikings are sort of jealous of it. So they use their skills as sailors to attack these sort of European kingdoms. Their ships were small, and they possessed very good navigation skills, so they could easily launch a surprise attack and then quickly return to sea before their victims could even sort of pull themselves together to defend themselves. One important Viking or Northman to recognize is Harald Sigurdsson of Norway. So the Vikings weren't always just sort of pillaging and conquering. They did do a lot of exploration as well, and some of that exploration led them all the way to Constantinople, where it was known that some of the emperors there used the Vikings or hired the Vikings as their personal guards. So Harald Sigurdsson was one such Viking that was employed as a guard in Constantinople, and he became very wealthy there before returning home to Norway. And we have sort of evidence of this by Byzantine coins, or Byzantine money that has been found in Norway. And Harald Sigurdsson later died while attempting to conquer England. Another important figure is Leif Erikson. You might know Leif Erikson from SpongeBob again. Happy Leif Erikson Day. But Leif Erikson was a real person who led some Western expeditions just to explore. He and his crew made it all the way to North America and Greenland, and they often encountered natives there that often ended in violent struggles. So they ultimately decided not to establish any settlements in North America or Greenland. They did, however, successfully establish settlements in Europe, most notably in France, Sicily, and England.